Welcome. My name is Josh Beck. I'm the Associate Director for Programming and Development in the Center for Latin American Studies, and I'd like to welcome you to our event. On behalf of the Center for Latin American Studies and our director, Dane Borges, who unfortunately is home with the stomach flu and couldn't be with us tonight. This is the third event in our 2006-2007 Latin American Briefing Series, which is a public lecture series that aims to bring together academic and policy experts and influential business and political leaders here at the university to address important contemporary issues in Latin American affairs. Last fall, we were fortunate to host prominent historian and political analyst Lorenzo Meyer for a discussion on the right versus the left and the newborn Mexican democracy, Can the Three Survive?, which is part of the CAT Center for Mexican Studies series on Mexico's presidential elections, implications and analyses. And in January, we hosted Alejandro Bendaña, Michelle Gobat, and Rose Spalding for a discussion on the 2006 Nicaraguan presidential elections. Later this spring, on May 4th, we will host Wayne Smith of the Center for International Policy and Luis Perez of University of North Carolina, along with a panel of our own faculty and graduate students for a discussion on U.S.-Cuban academic exchange. For more information on any of these events and a schedule of upcoming events, I'd encourage you to visit our website, where we also keep an archive of the video that we record from these events. I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us tonight, our faculty and graduate students, and our off-campus audience, which affords us the opportunity to host these important discussions. And I'd also like to extend a special thanks to our frequent co-sponsor, the International House of Chicago. Without their support, we couldn't host these wonderful events. I'd also like to take a brief moment to announce a lecture series. There's some posters in the hallway here, and I'll have one over on the table of a lecture series coming up this spring on human rights in Mexico that we're co-sponsoring with, the Human Rights Program and the CAT Center for Mexican Studies are organizing, and we are co-sponsoring. Finally, I'd like to introduce Alberto Simser. Alberto will introduce our speakers tonight and moderate their panel discussion. He joined our faculty as professor of political science in fall of 2006. His research focuses on elections and electoral fraud, corruption, and political economy of development, frequently within the context of Mexico. We're delighted to have him with us this evening to introduce our speakers and to moderate the question and answer session following their presentation.
Thank you, Josh. So I'm going to introduce the speakers in the order that they will talk. Adam Isacson has worked since 1995 at the Center for International Policy, an independent research and advocacy organization in Washington, D.C. He coordinates a program that monitors security and U.S. military assistance to Latin America and the Caribbean. The project, supported by individual donors and private foundations, has produced numerous publications on the subject, including the Just the Facts series of reference books on U.S. Latin American military cooperation. Since 1997, Mr. Isacson's project has focused especially on Colombia. Since 1998, his study of U.S. policy and accompaniment of Colombia's peace process has brought him to Colombia over 30 times, including 13 of the country's 32 departments. The project continues to monitor U.S. military assistance, to document its impact on Colombia's conflict and society, and to promote peaceful alternatives. Mr. Isacson holds an MA in International Relations from Yale University. He worked previously for the Arias Foundation for Peace and Human Progress in San Jose, Costa Rica. Lisa Haugaard has been executive director of the Latin America Working Group since June of 2002 and senior associate from 1993 to 2001. She has testified before the U.S. Congress and produced numerous reports and articles on U.S. Latin America policy. Prior to the LAWG, the Latin America Working Group, she worked as an analyst, editor, and translator at Jesuit research centers in Washington, D.C. and Managua, Nicaragua. She has a BA from Swarthmore College, a master's degree in Latin American Studies from New York University, and completed PhD exams in comparative politics at Columbia University. And she was a Fulbright Scholar in Central America. And finally, Joy Olson has been the executive director of the Washington Office on Latin America since 2003. Before that, she served as director of the Latin America Working Group based in Washington, D.C. for 9 years. Ms. Olson played a key role in successful campaigns to halt the deportation of Salvadorians to their war-torn country, to increase U.S. funding for Central American peace processes, and declassify U.S. documents related to the wars in those countries. She was instrumental in the successful effort to lift the ban on the sale of food and medicine to Cuba and in promoting greater transparency in U.S. military programs in the hemisphere. She has co-authored 3 books and is the co-founder of the Just the Facts project, documenting U.S. military programs in Latin America. Prior to directing the Latin America Working Group, Ms. Olson worked with the Lutheran Office on Government Affairs and the Washington Office of Church World Service. Her international experience includes 2 years as a development worker in Honduras and 4 years living and studying in Mexico. She has a master's degree in Latin American Studies from the National Autonomous University of Mexico and a Bachelor of Arts from Trinity College, Deerfield, Illinois. So without further ado, I give you Adam Isacson.
I love when that works. Good evening. I guess I'll start out just by talking for a moment about the project that the 3 of us have participated in for many years now, 10 years actually, which is called the Just the Facts project. What it tries to do is to monitor what the United States is doing militarily in Latin America. How big are the arms transfers? What are we sending? What are the training programs doing? Where are the bases? Where are the exercises? And we keep all of this in an online database whose address you'll see in the last slide, if we actually make the slides work well, rather than read to you. But, and we've been doing this for 10 years. Why? Why have we dedicated so much time to monitoring U.S. military assistance to Latin America? Well, for many reasons. First of all, Latin America is a principal destination of U.S. military assistance. Even in these days when U.S. attention is focused so much on the Middle East, 5 of the top 20 military aid recipients in the world are Latin American countries. Colombia is by far the largest aid recipient outside the Middle East. It's 5th in the world after, let me see if I can remember, Iraq, Israel, Afghanistan, and Egypt. More trainees, more U.S. military, or more military personnel are trained by the United States from Latin America and the Caribbean than from any other single region in the world. About 40% of the world's total, although we're not sure about the reporting from Iraq and Afghanistan. And there's a difficult history behind us of U.S. training and U.S. aid to Latin America's militaries. Latin America is uniquely placed because of it's our backyard, quote, in between quotes. It's a place where the United States has always exerted its power and pursued its interests in ways that only the rest of the world is starting to get used to now. The policies that have given us a bad name worldwide, the policies associated with people like Donald Rumsfeld or Dick Cheney or John Bolton, pretty common policies in Latin America throughout the 20th century. On top of that, Latin America is the world's least equal region economically. When you look at the figures from the World Bank, the UNDP, the gap between rich and poor is wider in Latin America than anywhere else, which means that means that the militaries of the region have historically played a different role. They don't exist to defend borders against foreign invaders. They're not fighting interstate wars. They're there to keep an internal enemy at bay. And U.S. aid has helped them do that with often tragic results. That's why we're keeping track of what's going on. So, does this work? Yes, okay. This is what U.S. aid to Latin America has looked like over the last 10 years. I could try. This is what U.S. aid to Latin America has looked like over the last 10 years. The red line is military assistance. The green line is economic assistance. The little skinny part of the green line that happens in later years is economic assistance, including 2 aid programs that only benefit 5 countries in the region. So you sort of get an idea of the split between the two. What does this tell us? At the start of the project, the aid amounts were small. This is the second term of the Clinton administration, 1997. Small and far less military. This is the years of the post-Cold War peace dividend. The huge amounts of military aid that Reagan and Bush had given to Central America had sort of gone way down, and they were undergoing peace processes in these countries where and economic aid was being, it was also down, but it was being somewhat sustained. But we started the project anyway, even though the amounts seemed low, because we knew stuff was going on. We were hearing about all these drug war programs going on throughout the region, bases being established as Southern Command pulled out of Panama, You'd hear like little headlines in the local news. This is when the World Wide Web was just starting up, so you'd be able to read foreign newspapers for a change, and you'd see that an exercise happened here, or the soldiers were digging wells and building schools and paving roads in another part of it. And we had no idea what the big picture was. And as we tried to get the big picture, we found that the big picture is hard to get of what, just even to get a total dollar amount or a total idea of how many people from country X were trained in the previous year. Because, A, reporting is bad. A lot of the key funding channels for aid to Latin America are not very transparent. They've gotten a little better over the years thanks to pressure from groups like ours, but they're still not good. And the number of funding channels is huge. The aid is fragmented across more than a dozen different programs that go to the militaries in different funding bills in the U.S. budget with different laws applying to them. And putting this patchwork together is not something that anybody in the U.S. government or U.S. Congress had done. When we published the first Just the Facts book in 1998, the Defense Department ordered 40 copies because they also didn't know. They also didn't have that big picture of what was going on. But okay, what happened in those 10 years? You see that the green line and the red line draw much closer together, starting with a big jump in 2000. That's Plan Colombia. And as you see, that's the first year, really, and the first and last year when we did the project, that military aid actually equaled economic aid. But it doesn't matter. The green and the red lines draw closer together over the years. You see military aid jumping up and staying at that 2000, 2003 level of roughly $850 to $900 million a year. And economic aid plateauing at around $1 billion. A little more if you add the Millennium Challenge and HIV/AIDS accounts, which go to 5 countries. Why did this happen? I mean, a big reason for this was Plan Colombia and the drug war in general. Money going to Colombia. The military aid to Colombia totals about $600 million out of the $900 million every year. And Peru, Ecuador, Mexico, Bolivia all saw their military aid increase as corollaries to Plan Colombia at the time. Meanwhile, there's just throughout all of this, there's been an underlying sort of imperative for what they call engagement, maintaining contact with key officers and the militaries of the region, often through things that don't have big price tags but involve large numbers of officers or other militaries. Everything from training exercises to conferences and symposia to having the head of Southern Command travel throughout the region to negotiating new deals with arms sales. Just maintaining that contact, just so that you can have influence, and how that influence is used is a subject of much debate and controversy. But you see that while military aid shot up as a result of these imperatives, economic aid pretty much plateaued. So let's look at this country by country. This is military and economic aid together, just giving an idea of which have been the priority countries over the last several years. And they're from bottom to top, from the number 1, obviously, from the number 1 to I think I got 14 countries up there. So the priority countries have been Colombia. This is ranked by adding the 11 years together. Colombia's gotten more aid than anyone else, about $5.4 billion just between 2000 and 2007. Peru, Bolivia, Haiti, Mexico, and then several Central American countries, particularly the Millennium Challenge countries. Let's see, as you see, the countries that have been the priority for U.S. aid have been the drug war countries. Although economic aid does bring up Haiti and the Central American countries, the ones that have, Haiti receives global HIV/AIDS money, and El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua have gotten Millennium Challenge aid. Let's zoom in just on the military aid. And that big blue thing there is Colombia. Again, 2/3 to 70% of the aid over the last several years has gone to just the military of Colombia compared to all the other countries. And the next countries in the list, though, Peru, Bolivia, Mexico, Ecuador, Brazil, that's all drug aid. That is all aid going to try to eradicate drugs, to interdict drugs, much of it for the police forces of those countries, but also much of it to encourage the militaries of those countries to take on the internal role of going after narco-traffickers. Let's just look at this by a funding source or by program. Again, counter-drug programs are what have accounted for the vast majority of military and police aid to the region. The big bluish-purple one is the International Narcotics Control Program, overseen by the State Department, carried out by the Narcotics Affairs sections of the U.S. embassies, roughly evenly split between military and police aid to the rest of the country, to the rest of the region. when you hear about Black Hawk helicopters going to Colombia, when you hear about fumigation programs or forced eradication programs or aerial interdiction shoot-down programs, or many other such programs, creating new units for the counter-narcotics units in the Guatemalan police, that's international narcotics control for the most part. The next one in dollar terms is something that does not have a friendly name. It's called Section 1004, but it's a big account. We're talking about $200 million or so of military assistance going through this account. And it has an unfriendly name because it's not a permanent program. In 1991, Congress gave the Defense Department the right to be the single lead agency for interdicting drugs overseas, and soon clarified that to mean that part of them doing that, part of the Defense Department and the military doing that, was that the Pentagon could start giving military aid through its own budget without having to run it by the foreign aid committees or the foreign aid committees or the international relations committees or even the State Department. Just give the aid on your own. And they do that, and it is now one of the main sources of aid. So those two bands there are all counter-narcotics programs. The yellow one is the Foreign Military Financing Program, which is sort of that's your traditional non-drug military aid, and most of that is going to Colombia, really since about 2002, when the Bush administration took on the counterterror role in Colombia in a big way. And that's the vast majority of it. Foreign military financing is the program that most benefited. For instance, it was used heavily in Central America by the Reagan administration in the 1980s, and it's back, but still pales in comparison, even in dollar terms, to the counter-drug military aid programs. What does this look like when you take away Colombia? Much less. Much less. We try to keep this in scale. Much less, but still, the drug war is still dominant. The light blue and the purple. That is the State Department and the Defense Department narcotics accounts are still the vast majority, even when you take it away. But look how small the rest of the region really is. And notice also that it doesn't increase very much, that it's actually been quite constant. The aid to the rest of the region has been rather quite constant over the years, vacillating is not the right word, varying between, that's not it either, who cares, between $200 and $300 million a year. And if you adjust for inflation, it's probably been really level or even gone down a little bit. And the Bush administration, as you see, plans to actually cut it back somewhat significantly in 2008, which we're not really complaining about. Let's look at training, the number of military and police personnel trained over the last 5 years. We did manage, working with allies in Congress, to get a report in the law where the state and defense departments have to tell Congress how many people from each country and through what accounts they trained in the year before, and this has been a very fascinating document. We don't have 2006 numbers yet, so this is just 01 through 05. But we find that about 17,000 Latin American military and police personnel were trained by the United States just last year. And that actually peaked in 2003 at about 22,000, largely because the United States went crazy training the Colombian army to help protect an oil pipeline and some other things that year. And then it went back down to the between 15 and 20,000 range. The top countries, recipients, Colombia, more than half of the trainees right now. Again, Colombia continues to be the real priority because you've got a hot war there and that the United States is intimately involved in. Next is Bolivia, although it does go down quite a bit in 2005, largely because of sanctions. Not because, this is before Evo Morales is elected. It goes down because Bolivia was not exempting U.S. personnel from the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court and thereby had a lot of its aid cut. Following that is, again, it's the drug war countries mostly, Mexico, Ecuador, El Salvador, and Honduras, which send a lot of disproportionate amount of students. You can walk behind me. Hi, Gary. A disproportionate amount of students to the School of the Americas and others. And then Peru, Argentina, Chile. But again, Colombia is, again, more than half of these 17,000 and has been for a while. If you look at this by who's funding the trainees, the drug war is important, but not all determining. But notice that the blue, the largest funder of trainees nowadays, is that unfriendly named Section 1004 program. It's the defense budget, using that $500 billion defense budget, just a few crumbs of it, just $200 million out of that $500 billion, get used to provide a lot of training and become the principal funding source for training Latin American military personnel. Then comes the International Military Education and Training, or IMET program, which is sort of like a scholarship program for trainees worldwide. That's the main non-drug training funding program, and it trains about 2,000 to 2,500 Latin American military personnel every year in non-drug stuff. It's the #1 source of scholarship money for the military and police who come to the former School of the Americas, who come to the Inter-American Air Forces Academy, which is the Spanish language school for Air Force students in Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, who come to the Naval Small Boat School, which offers Spanish instruction for navies, the School of the Americas for the navies in Mayport, Florida, as well as about 100 other English language institutions, military bases and others that offer instruction and keep their doors open to Latin American students worldwide. And occasionally IMET will pay for military or mobile training teams where you take a few military instructors and send them to the region and take care of a classroom and teach a classroom or maybe just a platoon full of military students. Sometimes it's cheaper to send a few teachers down rather than a few students up. After that, you see that yellow band above the red didn't exist in 2002. It came out of nowhere and is now the 3rd largest source of military training. It's called the Counterterror Fellowship Program. It's a brand new, you guys want to apply, do your PhD work? This was started because the Pacific Command wanted to train mainly with Indonesia and the Philippines on counterterror stuff and didn't want to have to go through the clumsy, horrible, deeply overseen foreign aid process, and pushed for a new fellowship program to offer mainly under the banner of counterterrorism a lot of the same training that IMET already pays for. This has quickly one thing we found is that whenever you move something into that $500 billion defense budget, it just mushrooms and it's got its foot in the door and it's never going to get yanked out again. And that's been the case with this counterterror fellowship program. After that is again, the State Department's International Narcotics Control Program and a bunch of smaller things. But it gives you an idea that, okay, the drug war is a significant but not the all-in-all vast majority source of funding for trainees. But still quite important, and the defense budget is just a huge, huge factor here. And the defense budget, remember, is, Joy will talk about this more, but it's overseen by the very busy, very distracted Armed Services Committees of Congress, and there's no State Department direction in how things happen through that budget. You'll see on this chart also the red, the IMET, and the brown, the foreign military financing, both shrink after 2003. That is because of the American Servicemembers Protection Act, which was a piece of legislation sponsored by Jesse Helms and Tom DeLay that was passed in 2002, which basically said that any country that doesn't sign a specific agreement giving our troops, our personnel, immunity from the International Criminal Court in The Hague can't get FMF or IMET. It only affected non-drug military aid. So this is not a piece of legislation we worked on much. We were like, oh, you're going to cut military aid? Well, okay, well, go ahead. And they did. And 12 countries in Latin America refused. 12 out of 23 worldwide that are members of the court who refused to sign these agreements were Latin American. And as a result, the number of trainees from those countries shrunk by, I think it was about 35%. It didn't shrink to zero because other, like the Defense Department budget programs and the counter-narcotics programs and the counter-terror fellowship programs all made up a lot of the gap. Not all of it, but made up a lot of it. And in fact, some countries like Paraguay and Peru actually saw, no, not Peru, what's the other one? Well, Paraguay anyway, saw their trainees increase just by using these other programs, sort of a little shell game that they played to maintain the training. However, the Southern Command and elements of the Defense Department and parts of the State Department complained to high heaven about how they were losing contact with a whole generation of military officers throughout the region, and we were losing influence, and Hugo Chavez was going to move in, and the Chinese were going to move in, and we were, and by the end of last year, the law had been changed to exclude IMET from these sanctions. So IMET is once again flowing as it did before to all of the punished countries, although FMF, which wasn't much anyway, is not. Just taking Colombia out of the picture here, yes, again, it's smaller. The non-drug programs are even more important. You see the blue, the Section 1004 disappears, international narcotics control is negligible. IMET, the counter-terror fellowship program, really dominate. And so the traditional, the drug war kind of falls off. And you can see it shrinking a little bit. That's the effect of the American Servicemembers Protection Act. Notable change, but not catastrophic. Now, the drug war, as I've said several times here, has been the most important rationale for aid and training. Yeah, there have been, this is Colombia, I'll get to that in a second. There have been other threats and missions that have sort of carried been used to as pretext or as reasons to justify this large amount of aid and even larger amount of training. But there's a real continuity here from the Cold War, when the mission was anti-communism, to the drug war, which really, as one head of Southern Command said in the early 90s, this is the only war we have, which sort of filled the gap, to now the war on terror. Always a reason to maintain high levels of military assistance, and always reasons to do so to encourage militaries to take on an internal role against a purported internal enemy, be it communists, which, as any student of Latin America knows, came to include union organizers and opposition politicians and journalists and dissidents and many others who've had to move here or disappeared in jail cells. Narco-traffickers, another internal enemy, for which militaries were encouraged all over the region to take on police roles. And now terrorists, a definition which both here and there is all too squishy. But there have been other rationales too, besides the war on terror: organized crime, just plain ungoverned spaces, areas like the Darien jungle or the Mosquitilla or the southern Colombia, places where there really isn't any government presence, and therefore bad guys can do whatever they want, and therefore we have to militarize them. So-called radical populism, be they Hugo Chavez and Evo Morales and the other leaders who don't like us all that much, who may ally against us and become a threat someday. Southern Command even talks about poverty and inequality as a potential threat. And then there's always the mission of engagement. All of these have been sort of the underlying reason why they've sustained these high levels of assistance to the region. And you find it always in the rhetoric and in the PowerPoint slides that not mine, but that the Defense Department and Southern Command will put together. The drug war in the age of the war on terror has fallen off a bit as the main rationale for maintaining all of these programs, but as these slides indicate, it's still number one by far. The war on terror really, it's there, it's something that enters the discourse every time there's any interaction between the United States and the militaries of the region, but it hasn't really stuck because it just doesn't make sense to talk about terrorism in Bolivia or Chile or Peru. I mean, who are you going after? The remnants of Shining Path? There's not much. I mean, there's only 4 groups on the State Department's terrorist list in the whole region, and 3 of them are in Colombia. So the drug war is still really the main thing. But in Colombia, that's different, though. After 9/11, before 9/11, the drug war was the only way that politically it was viable to give aid to the Colombian military, that the Clinton administration was able to, and Barry McCaffrey were able to ramp up aid to the Colombian military by selling it as a counter-narcotics program. It seems like so long ago, but back then in the 90s, there wasn't stomach for a big new messy counterinsurgency mission in Latin America. There was still bad taste in people's mouths from El Salvador and Nicaragua and Guatemala. That bad taste was not something that, actually the Bush administration sort of savored that taste, and 9/11 gave them a reason to expand the mission in Colombia, changing the law in 2002, allowing all previous counter-drug aid to be used for counterinsurgency. So Colombia, as I said before, $5.4 billion in assistance just since 2000. 80% of that, this is an old slide, that's 4.7, add 2 more years to that, or add 1 more year to that, and you get 5.4, of which 4.4 have been military and police assistance. 80% of our aid to Colombia since the onset of Plan Colombia in 2000 has been military. Some of these little small pie slivers going left to right, the ones that are blue, alternative development, 8% of the total. Aid to the 3 million displaced people, 4%. Rule of law, judicial reform, human rights, and peace, all lumped together, you get about 5% of the total. Everything else has been military or police. And the main efforts here have been we've given Colombia about 90 helicopters granted. They bought grant aid. They bought several more on their own. Many of them Black Hawk helicopters, which cost roughly $15 million apiece and cost about $3,000 an hour to operate. About $210 million out of the $600 million in military and police aid we give Colombia every year, $210 million, 1/3, just goes to aircraft maintenance, which really means paying private contractors, U.S. private contractors, to take care of these things and keep them full of fuel and make sure they got all the spare parts and basically be in Colombia on these contracts. Another big element of this, $90 million a year plus other costs like security and everything else, is the aerial fumigation program. Since 2000 only, we have sprayed 2 million acres rather, of Colombia's territory with the herbicide glyphosate in an effort to try to get rid of coca, the plant used to make cocaine. There have also been other counter-drug efforts like interdiction, trying to stop and shoot down aircraft that may or may not be taking drugs out of Colombia, trying to control drugs on rivers and in roads. And a lot of non-drug stuff since 2002, about $100 million plus to protect an oil pipeline, which is 44% owned by a U.S. oil company, helping set up elite mobile units throughout the region. I'm almost done. And helping support the biggest military offensive in Colombia's history that is now 3 years old and has been rather inconclusive, and basically trying to give President Uribe any other aid he asked for. Has the drug war worked? Well, here's what coca growing has looked like in the Andes since 1988. Hasn't changed at all. It's been in the 200,000 hectare a year range. And the first rumblings we're hearing about 2006 indicate that it hasn't changed very much either. 2 million acres. That's about, what is that? It's about, we're almost now the size of Delaware. Imagine spraying every square centimeter of Delaware. And nothing. It's actually, even I think it's remarkable, and we thought it wasn't going to work when it started, but it's amazing how badly it's failed to work. And the price of the stuff continues to fall. That's the bar graph showing the price of cocaine and heroin on U.S. streets, and the line graph. This is compiled by WOLA. They did a good job with the visuals here. The line graph shows how much we have spent every year on drug interdiction efforts, and it just keeps getting higher while the price gets lower. And you guys remember your supply and demand from Economics 101. If something gets cheaper, like gas never does, it means there's more of it. And I will hand off to Joy. Thank you. And that's the website of the military aid database.
I think Adam left me with that last chart because it's my personal favorite. That chart actually got put together when we found out that the administration had contracted a study to be done on the price and purity of cocaine and heroin on the streets of the U.S., and that the researchers had done the study, but it had never been released. So we kept asking questions, and after about 6 months of asking about it and not getting it released, we asked the congressional office to request it, and they did, and what we came back with was the data on that chart. So we released it for them, and they weren't real happy about that. But I think the point we want to make at this point in the presentation is simply that the main U.S. military program in the region has been the drug war, and as a drug policy, or as even as a military policy, but with counter-narcotics at its heart, it hasn't worked. Now we want to switch gears a little bit and talk about, I'm thinking of my presentation, a section of it, entitling it this way, Who's the Boss and Why Should You Care? As we've been monitoring these programs, one of the things that Adam has mentioned is that we've been looking at, and we wanted to pay attention to what programs were carried out by the State Department and what programs were carried out by the Defense Department. And in some ways you think, well, why does it matter? Because training, for example, military training is done by the U.S. military, so why should it matter whether or not it's governed under the State Department's budget and rules or directly under the Defense Department's budget and rules? Well, there's a little bit of history here, and we really think that it does matter. I'm not going to go back to like the year 1650 or anything, but so don't get too scared. But I am going to go back to 1961, and in some important dates for us. In 1961, the U.S. passed something called the Foreign Assistance Act, and the Foreign Assistance Act governs U.S. foreign assistance, and it is governed by the State Department. Over the next 40 years, that piece of legislation, the Foreign Assistance Act, is where all of the human rights, almost all of the human rights conditionality, the language that says that you can't send military aid to places where there's recently been a military coup, for example. All of that kind of language applies to the Foreign Assistance Act, but none of it applies to the Defense Department in terms of things that are governed under their budgets. So you're really looking at two different parts of the budget. The Foreign Assistance Act, which is state, and like the Defense Authorization, basically it's called, which is the Defense Department, the Department of Defense. So those are the two entities we're looking at. Now, when did the shift start to take place from, well, in 61, then I should also say that training of foreign military forces and the providing of equipment to foreign militaries was governed under the 61 Act. So essentially, the State Department was fundamentally involved in all the decisions that were going to be made about foreign military training or equipping. Now, one can question some of the things that they did during that period, but the State Department was at the lead. What happened in 1989 was really significant for the United States and for Latin America. And what happened was the Defense Department, as Adam mentioned, became the single lead agency for the detection and monitoring of drugs coming into the United States. Now, why is that important? It's important because it allowed the Defense Department to develop its own training and equipment programs for counter-narcotics purposes. And if you look at the first 10 years or more of assistance that took place, so from like 91 to the early 2000s, almost all of it was for Latin America. So this issue about who's making decisions about training and equipping foreign forces, when it came to Latin America, it was becoming more and more the Defense Department. Now, what's happened over the past few years is that suddenly other people are starting to pay attention to this issue because it's becoming very prominent in Iraq and Afghanistan. But what we saw in Latin America was this trend taking place over the decade before anything was significant was going on in terms of the U.S. involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan. So another important thing to point out is that, and I want to stress this here, because sometimes people in the Southern Command say, you're always beating up on us, and who's given us all of these authorities is Congress. And once Congress gives the military an authority, it's their job to do it. That's how, that's how militaries who work under civilian rule function. So, and I think they're completely right. And in terms of that criticism. So since the U.S. was given since the U.S. military was given the principal role in detecting and monitoring drugs coming into the United States, it tried to find partners to work with. And again, since most of the drug war was going on with Latin America, it looked to Latin America to find partners in the drug war. Well, who does the military go to find partners? They go to the people they know, which are the other militaries in the region. So then what you see taking place over the next decade is that more and more Latin American militaries start to have a role in their own countries in the war on drugs. And the U.S. military states this very clearly, that it was their intention to encourage foreign militaries to assume these roles. It was given this role by the Congress, and it was told, it's your job to be in charge of detection and monitoring of drugs coming into the U.S. You got to find somebody, in terms of their translation of it, we got to find somebody to work with, and they did. And what happened was that regional militaries took on more of these roles. The other thing is that since you have the military at the lead in this, what kind of solutions do militaries look for? Militaries look for military solutions to a problem. So you have them not just looking to who would be their natural partners and allies in the war on drugs. You have them looking at the kinds of solutions that are solutions that they can manage, which means that you had things like aerial fumigation becoming a principal part of the drug war in Colombia. Aerial fumigation is very heavy on equipment and technology. You also have programs like forced eradication of counter-drug, forced eradication of coca in particular, not just in Colombia, but in Peru and Bolivia as well. And again, when forced eradication was done in various countries, it was often done with local militaries. The host military would go in and do the eradication program. Sometimes police forces, depending on the area. What we saw as we started tracking these programs was that by now, what we see is that 74% of all of the training that takes place that the U.S. does of foreign military forces in Latin America, 74% of it is managed directly by the Defense Department budget, which means that the 40 years of human rights conditionality that has developed in U.S. law does not apply. Now, I would say that there is one human rights law that Lisa will talk about called the Leahy Law that does apply to the defense budget. But all of the rest of it simply does not apply because it's not, the legal jurisdictions don't cross there. All right, so the other thing we saw happening, and again, you have to think about what's been going on the past few years in Iraq and Afghanistan because these are really continuations of or expansions of these policies that we saw developing over the past few years. Adam mentioned this Section 1004, this, the DoD counter-drug program, as being one of the principal authorities that came about when the Defense Department took on this role. Well, as the years went by, they found that they needed to do more things and different things, and that they needed to develop new authorities. So then there are a series of numbers that developed. The next one was 1033, and that was supposed to be a special program to assist Colombia and Peru, right? Colombia and Peru in riverine counter-drug interdiction. So boats on rivers trying to stop drug trafficking. That program went up and down and in various formations and has lately been coming back, and a whole new list of countries has been added to it. And it's not about riverine training anymore. It's simply another kind of broad authority that the Defense Department can use to do counter-drug activities. Another one was what Adam mentioned as the Counterterrorism Fellowship Training Program that's directly under DoD. And then one of them that we're most concerned about right now and that we're really trying to track is something that's called 1206. I'm writing this down because you should pay attention to that one. 1206 is a new authority that has really come into effect only in about the last 2 years. And it's still very temporary. It's, again, another one of these temporary authorities. But what it is basically allowing the Defense Department to set up its own training and equipment program. Mind you, the stuff we've been talking about has mostly been counter-drug related. But the 1206 is basically a parallel foreign assistance program to the foreign assistance program run by the State Department. And the rationale for 1206 was related to Iraq and Afghanistan, and it was related to the war on terror. But what we saw in their first year of allocating money in Latin America, they allocated money in Latin America. I mean, if you look at the world, and you know, if you get a security analysis from the Pentagon about what's going on in different parts of the world and what we should be scared about, in terms of a terrorism analysis, Latin America is about as low on that list as you can get. The State Department says that there are no al-Qaeda cells in Latin America, that there are potential threats, but potential threat is basically defined as any kind of illicit cross-border activity can be a potential threat. So that's a really broad definition. But getting myself back to my point here, 1206 was used in its first iteration to fund a program that was, they'd been pitching for years and years, and they hadn't been able to get going really. And it's something that was called Enduring Friendship. And Enduring Friendship started out, boy, this must have been 6-7 years ago. The discussions about it started out way back then, and initially they wanted it to be an armada of the Americas. They circulated these white papers describing what they were thinking about, and the white papers got shot down, and so it ended up not happening. And then that program morphed in a number of ways. And lately, what the initial set of money was for was really like communications equipment between small Caribbean countries. I mean, it wasn't any alarming expenditure, but it's the kind of thing where you think, why do they need a special authorization because of the war on terror to be providing communications equipment between small Caribbean nations? You know, it was. This is something that we should all be concerned about and looking out for. And then one last example. There's not a lot of information about this, simply because it's all classified, I'm sure. There was a report about a year and a half ago in the Washington Post that said that there had been an incident in Paraguay. This goes way beyond just Latin America, but what brought it all to light was something in Latin America. There was an incident in Paraguay in which two U.S. Special Forces personnel, apparently not on duty, somebody tried to rob them. And as they were fighting back, they killed the assailant. But it was only after this incident took place that the U.S. ambassador found out that these guys were in the country. And the way the U.S. foreign policy and foreign service is supposed to function is that the ambassador is the top dog in the country and that everybody reports through the ambassador. And there is not supposed to be U.S. military presence in a country that the ambassador doesn't know about. And so what became known was that there was a whole new program that was doing this, that was sending out special forces groups, small special forces groups, into, it didn't really define where because this information hasn't been released, but into various countries, again with a counterterror mission, and that they were supposed to be basically seeking out, and the article said, even up to killing potential terrorists. But again, this was going out without the ambassadors even knowing what was happening. So this came to light, and these new groups were called military liaison elements. And there have been small stories since then that have made reference to this. I was in Paraguay not long ago, and we were doing an interview with at the U.S. Embassy, and we said, well, we want to talk about the military liaison elements. And the guy stopped right there, and he said, there are none in the country now. Let me just think, two last points. I think that it is, what's important to take away from this is that we called our newest publication, the coordinated publications we do through this project, and the Just the Facts project are these. They're on the table back here. We called this one Below the Radar because we felt like what had happened over the past 10 years in Latin America and what people are beginning to see in terms of the state versus defense issues and the development of different kinds of programs has really happened in Latin America first. But it's all been below the radar. It's been, nobody's been paying attention to what's been happening in Latin America. And also, the reason that I think it's really important to point this out is that when the U.S. military says that the civilians keep giving us these missions, they're completely right. And at some point, it's the civilians who have got to start reversing these trends. And the reason that this keeps moving in this direction, moving toward having foreign assistance programs being carried out by the Pentagon, is that nobody in Congress likes foreign aid. Nobody in Congress wants to talk about foreign aid. And what they easily pass year after year because they feel an intense need to is the defense budget. So it's easier for them to get programs approved through the defense budget. And we feel very strongly, both with the drug war, which is what started this section of this presentation, and with these kinds of issues, military training and equipping, that we have to stop doing what's easy and start doing what makes sense, and also stop doing things that look tough but are completely ineffective, which is where we are with the drug war. So with that, I will pass it off to Lisa.
One of the things we've looked at in this project is how human rights intersects in U.S. policy with military training. Say you have a controversial decision in front of you about training an army with a poor human rights record. Now, the members of Congress who are most concerned about human rights, and it's not a big group, but they're there. What they do is pin their hopes on human rights legislation, on conditions. If you can't persuade an administration from pursuing the wrong path of arming and equipping an army with a poor human rights record, then at least let's put some human rights conditions on that aid and training. Or if you believe it's really the right thing to do, but you're still concerned about it and you want to see those conditions. So that's what members of Congress will do. The Southern Command, the U.S. military operations concerned with Latin America, and the Defense Department, what they think is that what is key is training and educational conferences and educational activities. Say that we're training a military with poor human rights record. Let's give them a good unit of human rights training. Let's train them in international humanitarian law. Let's arrange conferences, etc. Now, both those things can be useful in their place, and I'm going to talk a bit about what they can do. But what we've observed in over the years in U.S. policy towards Latin America is that the main question is, what army do we choose to train and equip heavily? Since no amount of human rights training and no human rights condition can really turn around an army if the country's top leadership doesn't have the political will to do this, and if the country's justice system does not produce justice. And second, what is also important, and we can see this at this moment, is what is the example that our own country is setting and that our own military and civilian leaders are setting. Now, I mean, we saw this not all theoretical. I'm talking about it as if it were. We saw this very much with the decision to start an enormous, and Adam demonstrated exactly how enormous it was, military assistance and training program for Colombia. And when the Clinton administration, because this was a Democratic policy, when the Clinton administration decided to do this, some of us went to Clinton administration officials and begged them not to do it. Don't do this, it's the wrong decision. Both because we had concerns about the drug policy and the aerial spraying, and because we were concerned about the Colombian Army's human rights record. And Clinton administration officials swore up and down, the association with the U.S. Army, the training that we're going to give them is going to make them better. Trust us, it's going to make them better. Well, our begging got nowhere. So our resort was Congress, and Congress agreed to put human rights conditions on U.S. aid to Colombia, which are pretty remarkable conditions. But I'm going to tell you a bit sort of how that played out, and sort of you can judge for yourself at the end. This past decade that we review in this report does show some real advances in human rights legislation, in two in particular. One, the Leahy Law that Joy referred to. That's a worldwide provision. It says that U.S. assistance, arming, equipping, and training of units of foreign military forces will not happen, should not happen if those forces commit abuses and if those abuses are not investigated and prosecuted. It sets a high a standard of gross human rights violations, and it's a good law in theory. It's a very good law in theory, because it gets to the heart of the issue, which is that violations must be investigated and prosecuted. Now, does this make me rest easy at night, knowing that no U.S. Assistance and training can go to military forces engaged in human rights violations? Well, no. What we found in looking at it is that this can be a useful piece of legislation, but only in the most, if you have a very organized group of people, both international human rights groups and in-country human rights groups, working in concert and pushing really hard for it to work. In those, and you have congressional interest and congressional pressure, and in those very limited cases, it can have a limited use. But in most of the world, really nobody's minding the store on this. And when we looked at the Leahy law, is that it's all about what you've set up as a system where in embassies, in U.S. embassies around the world, there's the human rights officer who's supposed to be screening members of the military that are supposed to receive training. And the problem is the databases that they're working with have nothing in them. So they're pretty empty databases. And they don't have a real system of how they're supposed to go about and put information in those databases. In some cases, they may be Googling, same as we might do. And we found in testing the case of Mexico, we found that there was not much in the database at all, and we had to send them information to put in the database. Well, that was some time ago. More recently, the State Department thought, well, let's have a technological fix to this, and let's create a new database program that's a good software called ACES, and this is going to make the difference. Well, a year after ACES was put in, apparently there wasn't much in that database either. So it's been, but this is not to say, it's still good that it's there. It's something. And it's there that you can try to use it at different moments. Probably in case of Colombia, it's one of the places where the Leahy law has most worked. There is a list of units that cannot get U.S. assistance, but that's really because of very strong, work by human rights groups in country and by Senator Leahy himself is personally interested in this, and it requires a lot of work. And there's still plenty of U.S. assistance going to units that, in fact, are committing human rights abuses. Now, a second advance during this period was the specific human rights conditions on aid to Colombia. And that was aimed at breaking links between the Army and the paramilitary forces who committed abuses, and it was aimed again at forcing investigations and prosecutions of military members who committed abuses, or police. Again, it looks great on paper. One of the interesting things about these conditions is that they have a consultation process with human rights groups, and all of our organizations have been part of this since the year 2000. We meet every 90 days, whether we like it or not, with high-level State Department officials on this. And there's also consultation, not as regular, with human rights groups in Colombia. But what we found, and that's good. I mean, what that has forced is a dialogue with high-level State Department officials on problems with the Colombia program and with the Colombian military. And I'd say that's positive. But we did find that there's a very strong incentive on the State Department, and a few honest State Department officials have told us this at different moments. They're going to certify no matter what, because there's this pressure to keep the aid flowing. So it's been, over the years, we've had two periods when aid was actually held up, or a portion of aid was held up, because it's only tied to a piece of the aid. One was right after the massacre of two families in San Jose de Apartado. It was held up for about 5 months. And it was just held up for the longest period of time for all of 2006. And it was just released about last week. And that's still in flux because Senator Leahy is not entirely pleased. So it's been a useful lever, but again, does it make you think that you can just give this military assistance and all will be well? No. It's just kind of the best thing that you can do when you have no other options. But it doesn't make me, as a human rights advocate, rest easy. And again, that's the best case, because that's where people are watching. That's where there's congressional interest. That's where there's great human rights groups on the ground, Colombian groups. That's where, this is where we've made it work most, and it's not that much. So it's not, so what we try to argue with Congress and with the Southern Command is that this isn't enough, that these decisions are, the beginning decision to train and equip a military is what needs to be looked at as well. Now, on the training side, you can have specific international humanitarian law training for militaries. And the United States does provide that, but that again does not guarantee actual compliance. Ultimately, it's investigation and prosecutions that work in country, not just training, even though that can be useful. Over the past decade, the U.S. Southern Command has had a series of conferences called the Human Rights Initiatives. That was conferences and various events between militaries of the region and the U.S. military. Those are fine. It's all very well. That's great. They want to do that, but it still doesn't get to this basic issue of whether a justice system works and whether we should be choosing to make these choices of armies to train. Now, one of the interesting and terrible things that have developed as Southern Command was very proud of doing these great conferences that they were doing about the importance of international humanitarian law and civil military relations. Well, lo and behold, at that particular period of time, we were also seeing Guantanamo, Abu Ghraib, the CIA's clandestine prisons, and the United States' incredibly heavy-handed campaign against the International Criminal Court, which Adam had described when he was talking about the sanctions under the American Servicemembers Protection Act. And all of this was, of course, very carefully covered in the Latin American press. It was all over Latin American major papers' editorial pages. And it was interesting to me, sort of knowing the U.S. role in Latin America has been complicated, that in editorials across the region really mourned the U.S. losing this role on human rights, which of course has not always been followed in Latin America, but really being very upset that at this most international, overt level, the United States was so clearly backing away from international human rights standards. And that, of course, makes it very difficult for the U.S. military to talk about human rights issues, to hold these conferences, and basically undercuts any effort that they might do by these kinds of initiatives. I want to talk, it's now been basically a 5 or 6 year package the United States has provided to Colombia. You've seen the scale of it. It's been 80% military. And it's a moment when that package officially was supposed to be over. And the Colombian government has come to the United States with another request for basically another 6 years. Sounding like it would talk more about social development than military assistance, but in fact, the Bush administration has submitted to Congress a budget request that is exactly identical to what we've seen over the last 6 years. But it gives us, with a Democratic Congress taking the reins, it's a moment to re-examine that package and to look at different ways of helping Colombia. It's a moment to really look at the aerial spraying program and the fact that it hasn't worked over the last 6 years. And it's a time to re-examine the composition of aid, which has been 80% military, and to refocus assistance really on the victims of the conflict, on the people displaced by violence, on the brave people who are testifying against paramilitary leaders who are taking the demobilization, or going under the demobilization law. So it's a moment to really relook at that and see whether U.S. assistance could change. And we can address some questions on that if you're interested afterwards.
So I don't know if you want me to field the questions or...
Sure. Yeah.
Sure. It takes the
Okay.
burden of us.
All right.
Well, I got a question for Joy. Not because she's the boss of my daughter. I think I was interested by your point of making the difference between state and defense, particularly when you look at Bush, who had a four-star general at state for 4 years during his first term.
Mm-hmm.
You look at 1961 as a key date. I think it's probably 1960, if you really think about what happened at that time. I was a student at that time. Lumumba in Africa, Castro and Che Guevara in Cuba, Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam. You're really focused on Afghanistan and Iraq. And my time it was Vietnam. But you know, if you just look at the difference between the civilian and the military, I think there is a more fundamental difference between the power structure and the public opinion. In America, and that's really Dr. Chomsky's point, if you look at the last 50 years, America has wanted to be a dominant power. And anything that goes against dominance, the power structure, and I don't care whether you're a civilian or military, they are doing everything they can, and they started in Vietnam, and they did it everywhere else in the world. Among all of those places, you had South America, but you know, not necessarily the most important part of the dominance, but the power structure. Even a Republican general warned us in 1959, be careful about the industrial military structure. Whether it is Exxon, whether it is a Democrat or Republican senator, or whether it is a general, the power structure is just here to reinforce that dominance that America wants to have over the rest of the world. And what's very interesting in Chomsky's book, public opinion doesn't share those values. And the most obvious example is today. 70% of the people want to get out of Iraq, but the power structure keeps us there. How do you feel the gap? You know, I think that the difference in the American democracy between the power structure, and I'm not really sure civilian versus military makes sense, Democrats versus Republican. I mean, when I was my daughter's age, Kennedy and Johnson got us in Vietnam way before Nixon. I mean, just look at Colombia. It's not Bush. The other guy started it, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, but the public opinion, if you take any poll, are you for democracy? Are you for giving nuclear arms to Israel? Are you for human rights? I mean, you're going to find the public opinion always on the right side of the issue. How do we fight? How do we fill that gap? I don't know. What do we do about it? I'm sorry.
No. No, I think it's a really important point. I mean, the only way to fill that gap is for people to become much more involved in the political discourse in this country and in electoral politics. I think. I would just say two things too. That that structures become self-perpetuating, and well, first, I do think it matters who's in charge of making decisions, whether or not if it's the military structure or the State Department. I'm certainly not saying that I think the State Department's made, a lot completely good decisions in the past either. But I do think that if you come at an issue from the State Department's basket of possible solutions, you have many more options than if you come at it with the Defense Department's possible solutions. So I do think fundamentally that still is important. But structures become very self-perpetuating. The big one is the drug war. You have now massive institutional investment structurally within both the U.S. government and within the contractors, which are used extensively. Much of that money that we define as foreign assistance to Colombia in terms of the drug war ends up going to pay U.S. contractors who are flying the fumigation planes and
drug war industrial complex.
Yeah, it's the drug war has its own industrial complex, and it's one of the things that keeps it going. I wanted to clarify one thing, just so I didn't leave a misimpression. When I talked about the military liaison elements, the State Department does now say that ambassadors are now informed when they're sent into different countries. So,
major victory.
Yeah.
They're good team players.
In the back.
I wrote down this quote because I thought it was significant. On March 22, I don't know if any of you heard this on NPR, but there was a Michelle Kelman report, and Congressman McGovern said that he advocates shifting U.S. priorities for Colombia in the mix. He says, I don't like this current ratio of 80% military and 20% social and economic investment. I think it should be the other way around. We need to make it clear that we are not a cheap date.
He loves that.
That sounds like him.
He loves that comment. Yeah.
So my question is, for you, Lisa, given this statement and the fact that there is a Democratic Congress now, how is LOG challenging Congress in regard to the mix of aid?
Yeah. Well, we're working obviously directly with Jim McGovern and with Democratic leadership as well on the House side, and with Senator Leahy on the Senate side, to encourage them to really radically change the aid package to Colombia, and being very specific about where we'd want it to go. Really, with this idea of being framed around helping the victims of the conflict, one, and two, creating an effective drug policy, because this is very not only incredibly inhumane, but it also doesn't work. And assisting those elements of Colombia's judicial system that are actually functioning, such as the Ombudsman's office and the Inspector General's office, and at the moment, the Attorney General's office. So, and then really increasing assistance to displaced persons and trying to have assistance also that helps create a database of land that should be returned to those who've had it stolen by violence, just as an example. We're pressing Congress hard. We're concerned about one of the difficulties of working on the drug war issues is that people's reactions are incredibly stupid in Congress. And it's a very it's just a knee-jerk thing. Oh, I don't want to be soft on drugs, therefore I have to go and do the worst possible thing. And there's a really strong group of drug warriors in the House in particular. And they're going to be trying to, everything we try to take out of the package, they will be busily trying to put back in. Colombian Embassy is a very effective lobbyist on their own behalf. So there's a real, just having a good idea doesn't, even with a different makeup in Congress, doesn't necessarily get you. One of our concerns is, what are new members going to do? We have all these new members, and they could very easily take this stupid approach because they don't know, and say, okay, somebody's getting up there and talking about, got to put this military aid, and aerial fumigation money back in. because it's tough on drugs. And so new members really need to be educated. So we've been going around to all the new members, and we've been asking constituents to go around and talk to all new members in Congress about this, because we're worried even if we get something in that it's vulnerable, because this is such a hard, drug policy is such a hard issue to deal with. So it's very, it's a really labor-intensive work at the moment, which it's important for it to go on both at a policy level in Washington and at a constituent level as well, because honestly, just understanding how drug policy doesn't work, it isn't quite, well, everyone should see Adam's slideshow. It just seems to be incredibly impervious to data. It's a very difficult thing to get around.
Can I just finish up with, do you have any specific percentage mix that you are advocating in Congress, like, in response to the 80-20?
Well, we're trying to get whatever we can get, basically, and pushing for as much as we can get.
I think we have some question in the back, gentleman in the back.
Are the Latin American countries that are not receiving military aid from us the same as those that are known or at least presumed not to be exporting drugs?
Let's see. The only countries in Latin America that are not getting any military aid from us right now are Cuba and Venezuela, and Venezuela may even still have a couple of National Guard members trained. Costa Rica sure does get aid. I mean, they don't exempt our troops from the International Criminal Court, so they did have some drop. But yeah, Costa Rica has even on occasion sent some police to the School of the Americas. Small, we're talking like $1 million a year or less in aid, but they do get some. So everybody does get some. Our reach is very long, and the relations. Again, it's that imperative of engagement, the need to have relationships with the officer corps of every single country in the region. And probably if the Miami Cubans weren't upset, we'd be training in Havana too right now.
Back there.
My question is in regards to possible solutions to the problems that were raised up today. It seems to me a lot of the campesinos in Colombia and Peru and other countries in Latin America that are growing coca don't really want to grow it. Oftentimes they're growing it just because this is the only way that they can make enough money to feed their children and to clothe them. So my question is, a solution that I read a few years ago, I don't know where it's at right now, was the idea of subsidizing these farmers. Instead of spending these billions of dollars on weapons and sort of chemicals that are destructive to the environment, why not spend this money in subsidizing these farmers and then convincing them through money to, instead of growing coca, to grow corn, potatoes, other crops that they've traditionally grown for many years. I was wondering, where has that idea gone? And also, if you offer any other solutions to this problem.
The idea of like paying farmers not to grow coca and to grow something else directly, it was actually tried in Bolivia in the late 80s and early 90s and kind of didn't work. It was just too hard to monitor and keep an eye on what everybody was doing. And I would kind of put that in the same category as fumigation, another shortcut that ain't going to be that is not ever going to be a real substitute for governance. As long as places like Guaviare, Caquetá, Chapare, Yungas, Alto Huallaga, as long as they have no government presence, as long as these are places where you've got thousands and thousands of people living but nobody building roads, and you don't have a judge, you don't have anybody, nobody holds land title, they can have which means they can have their land taken any time and just have it, stolen. As long as everybody's living this hand-to-mouth existence just sort of on their own, Wild West, forget it. You're never going to have a legal economy. You can come in and tell people to grow plantains, but it's not going to work. These shortcuts over and over and over again ultimately fall on their face. And the solution, there's a little bit of a military and police solution. You've got to have somebody there. You've got to have Wyatt Earp there to keep the bad guys from killing people, but that's a small percentage of the problem, of what you really need to invest. And we've been completely the opposite. We've chosen a military solution for a temporary state presence, the military patrol that passes through and never stays, and the spray plane that flies overhead, and you've seen the results.
I'd like to just address a part of this. It's not like there are no other alternatives out there, and I think this is what doesn't get addressed. There is no alternative that is a silver bullet to the drug problem. Basically, the most important thing the U.S. could do to help Latin American countries with their counter-narcotics problem is to reduce demand in the United States. So, which can relate to having treatment-on-demand programs here. It really means paying attention to chronic drug users, because those are the ones who use the largest amount. It means making domestic policy choices here that can have an impact on production in other places. And in Southeast Asia, there have been some efforts, really concerted efforts, and Bolivia is trying this in the Chapare right now, of trying to do cooperative eradication. Hand in hand with community development. Cooperative eradication means that you go into a community and basically convince the community to start eliminating the production of coca, and you help the community figure out alternative livelihoods. One of the truly sad parts of Plan Colombia has been that the military strategy was always 10 steps ahead of the development strategy. So you would have places, fumigated way before there was any other kind of economic opportunity available to people. So what did they do? They either waited for their crop to recover or moved somewhere else and started production there. I was in a community in Colombia this past summer, and we were talking about, they thought they were going to get fumigated soon, and so they were talking about the problem. And I said, well, so what happens here? How does it impact the community when the spray planes come? And they said, well, some people leave. And then they said, but, other people, if they have one plot of coca and it gets destroyed, they just go a little farther into the forest, they, cut up, clear some more land, and then they get a second crop going. So I said, so by, the third time you've been fumigated, you've got 4 plots of coca growing, where previously you only had 1. And they said, yeah, that was how it worked. So I think realizing that there are alternative approaches and getting the development side of this ahead of the military strategy, which so far no one has done.
Do you want to add something to this?
Well, just that I think everyone wants an easy solution to the problem of drugs, and it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen here. We can't have zero. We're not going to achieve zero drug use. It's a human problem, and it's not going to happen abroad in drug production. So you have to go to the least, the solutions that produce the most good with the least harm. And that means alternative development, good alternative development programs such as Joy described. They're not going to solve all the problems, but they're not going to hurt so much, and they may do some good. They're worth trying. Domestic demand reduction, treatment, that's number 1 if you want to be effective. That really needs to be expanded. But we also have to live with a certain amount of drug production and a certain amount of drug use and be realistic about it, and we will then have both go farther in terms of dealing with the problem of drugs, and we will also not produce the same kinds of negative consequences either here or in Latin America.
I'd like to make use of the fact that I have a microphone just to push you guys a little bit on this question. So from the little I know about the topic, I've seen that whenever you look at the demand side, it doesn't matter what policy you're following, whether it's community development or suppression through fumigation. I've seen how, sometimes I read an article where, production in Colombia went down and production in some neighboring country went up, more than made up for it. So it seems that attacking the demand side is not very effective. And so I want to get your take on the, this much maligned solution that a lot of people propose. I'm not necessarily proposing it, but I'm interested in hearing your take on legalization as a solution to the drug problem.
That's always a hard one, but I looked into it a bit as I sort of started to work on this, and I think legalization would help Latin America a great deal. I'm not so sure it would help us. I mean, I personally, I have, my mom died of illegal drug, cigarettes. And would I advocate no cigarette smoking? Well, actually, I wouldn't. I don't think that's going to work. But on the other hand, I'm not necessarily thinking that we should have, more temptations and health problems and easy access out there as a public health issue. And that's why, sort of after really kind of looking at this and grappling with this, I'm really we need to treat it as a public health issue here. And that means there are some negative consequences for Latin America, because legalization would be nifty from that perspective, and would eliminate some of the military kinds of problems that come along with it.
Could you make a distinction between legalization and decriminalization? Because it seems if you're going to treat it as a public health issue, it's a question of decriminalization, not necessarily legalization. And that's it's just as there is the question of all kinds of drugs. I mean, we're not talking about just cocaine and heroin and the so-called illegal drugs. We have a whole drug economy that we manage pretty well without it being criminalized all the time. And also from being a pastor, which had most of the young men in my parish in prison, drug related, that we can't incarcerate all the young men in my parish doesn't solve the problem just as much as killing campesinos in Colombia doesn't solve the problem.
Right. I think when you begin to think of it as a public health issue, you begin to go on to look at different shades of decriminalization. I don't want to go into it, but there's a great book by Peter Reuter examining different regimes in Europe and in different parts of the world on the scale, and what hurt more on public health versus helped more on issues like people being incarcerated. It's a very interesting look at it, because it's difficult to figure out exactly where the perfect place is along that spectrum, but that provides some interesting look at it.
I'm starting to be confused. It seems to me that the military don't really care about drugs, what you're doing, if we were in the marvelous world without drugs, they'll find another reason to give money to the guerrillas and to the militaries of South America. It's a smoke screen, isn't it?
Sorry.
Was that a question?
No. No, feel free to respond. I just wanted to take some more questions.
Take a few.
Okay, why don't we take a few questions, gentlemen?
Thank you. A couple of quick quotes and a question. The first quote is the title for this. If I remember correctly, that was the first congressional hearing around Plan Colombia in year 2000. The title was Colombia, Are We Sitting in Our Assets? I have a copy here. It was scheduled for February 11, 2000. It finally happened on February 15, 2000 under another more technical name. But anyway, here's the document. And the other quote is from the letter, the notification letter from the U.S., Robert Solik, the U.S. Trade Representative at that time, year 2003, November 18, to Haugaard, then Speaker of the House, just notifying Congress that the U.S. was starting talks about free trade agreements with Indian countries. And there was only one reference on that letter to Plan Colombia, and it said if the FTA would serve as a natural complement to Plan Colombia, which Congress had backed significantly over the years. So my question, I think for Adam and all, is what do you think? Can you please explain us what the connection between the U.S. military aid given through Plan Colombia and the U.S. economic policies, economic policies that the United States has been promoting on Latin America? I'm talking about privatization, the so-called free trade, etc.
Maybe we should take a couple of more questions and then have the panelists respond, and then I want to invite everybody. There's a reception outside, so right after that, everybody's invited to join the panelists and maybe talk to them on a more one-to-one basis. Yeah, you were waiting.
I want to follow up on that smoke screen question and ask if perhaps the drug war is not beneficial as a distraction from the multinational game of mineral extraction.
Yeah, I just wanted to all three of you mentioned the increasing role of the military in taking police actions. I wanted to ask you guys to talk a little bit more, if you could, about the effects of the military entering policing roles, and especially in states that don't have the type of internal civil war premise that the Colombian army does.
Should I start there? Or, oh, I'm sorry.
What? Okay, one more, and then
it's sort of a follow-up to that. You mentioned Abu Ghraib, you mentioned CIA, secret prisons, Black Hawk helicopters in Colombia. What kinds of, related to this military aid, if you could just comment on any new developments you've seen in Latin America of the U.S. Reestablishing its military foothold in the region, forward operating locations, the new school or training institute in El Salvador for police, and there have already been some studies linking human rights abuses with some of the training there. At least I saw a report from C-Space, which is the Committee of Solidarity with Salvadoran people. I was just wondering if you had any comments on sort of the military infrastructure and U.S. military.
I'll start on the policing issues. This is something that we've been following very closely because, especially in really the region breaks down sub-regionally right now in terms of how militaries and the civilian governments are seeing military roles. You've got the Southern Cone countries who went through the dirty war period, still having pretty clear divisions between policing and military functions. But at the other, well, Brazil's, at the other end of the spectrum right now, you've got Honduras, Guatemala, Salvador, and Mexico, who are massively using their militaries and policing functions. And this is, I mean, it's interesting because the U.S. has stayed engaged with in particular, the Mexican military is, sometimes yes, sometimes no, but the Central American militaries, the U.S. has been engaged with them for a long time, done a lot of professionalization training, while the U.S. has not focused much attention or resources on professionalization of the police. And what you have going on in Central America, for sure, is a tremendous public security crisis right now. And it's been going on for a number of years, but people are clamoring for a mano dura, a heavy-handed response. And the civilians are once again turning to the militaries to step in, right now doing kind of backup to the police. But in terms of roles, the Mexicans have been going the farthest. And this has been going on a number of years too, but it's getting a lot of press right now in Mexico, where there have been these extremely gruesome and violent killings that are related to drug trafficking. They have gone in to certain cities, and basically the military has taken over all of the policing functions in certain cities in Mexico. Not as a permanent thing, but there are a number of areas where just since the Calderon administration has come in that the military has moved into policing functions. And I think this issue of roles, what should be the role of the military in response to these issues, is incredibly important. And there's a point that we looked at in the study, but we didn't talk about here, that I think relates real clearly to this. And that is that when we see roles revert from or change from civilian to military jurisdiction, what we almost never see is them reverting back. And most of the countries, Mexico, for example, the Mexican ambassador told me this a couple of days ago again, that this is temporary, that they're turning to the military as a temporary solution. But you never see an end game plan to get them out of using the military in these functions. And that's what I think needs to start taking place. In terms of presence, What you see now is a less heavy presence, in a sense, of the U.S. Military in Latin America than when we started this project. Because when we started this project, the Panama Canal Zone had a number of U.S. military facilities. A number of them moved to Puerto Rico and then on to secondary locations after that. Most of those functions are outside of Latin America now. The U.S. has a regular presence at the Sotocano Air Base in Honduras. And then we have these what are now called security cooperation locations. They used to be called forward operating locations, but I think it sounded too much like there might be some forward operating going on there. So they got renamed. And they're now called cooperative security locations, CSLs. They do the same thing. Basically, the U.S. negotiated 10-year agreements with to use airstrips and have people in Manta, Ecuador, at the main airfield in El Salvador, and in Aruba and Curacao. And these facilities are under the agreements that are negotiated between the host nation and the U.S. They're 10-year agreements to allow counter-drug surveillance flights, basically, to operate out of those facilities. If you look at what's taking place with the U.S. military around the world, I think the direction things are moving in is actually to have smaller U.S. presences in various places, smaller than the forward operating location model. In part because what you see now in Ecuador is a good example. The current president of Ecuador says he won't renew the agreement. It expires in 2 years? 09, no? And that he's not going to renew it. Which means the U.S. made a huge investment in this airstrip, et cetera, and it's a big investment. It's very politically controversial, and if you can negotiate an arrangement whereby your planes can stop in and people can maybe stay overnight, but not much more than that, and it's very flexible, I think those are the kinds of things that we'll see more of.
Can we get some quick responses from you guys? Maybe take a minute each.
Sure. Are drugs a smokescreen in 1 minute in Colombia? Drugs are one of many interests the U.S. has in Colombia. They're the most easy to sell back home, obviously. Colombia, strategically located, big coast on 2 oceans right near the Panama Canal, key shipping lanes. Quite a bit of unexplored oil reserves. We have no idea how good those oil reserves are, but probably there. And we've invested a lot in Arauca and Putumayo, 2 areas of Colombia that have a lot of oil. A lot of anthracite coal, which we've mostly cleaned out of our own dirt here in the United States. So that's always an issue. And of course, maybe perhaps even more important right now, Colombia has one of the only presidents who says yes to us on a regular basis. And so we're not going to say no to him on a regular basis. And that's probably going to be the number one thing, maybe even more than looking soft on drugs, but that may be the number one factor complicating our efforts to demilitarize U.S. aid to Colombia right now, because Uribe doesn't want it demilitarized. And we're going to have to make sure Congress says no to Uribe. Even though, he's the photographic negative of Chavez in the eyes of Washington. So there's several issues at play here. The question sort of indicated that maybe military assistance is helping push the free trade agreement through. I don't know if it's that direct, that we're making sure that the military puts down anybody who opposes the free trade agreement. Clearly, yeah, we're helping an organization that is in league with paramilitaries that kill the vast majority of union leaders in the country that's most dangerous to organize a union. Yeah, that's a few degrees of separation and an unhappy coincidence. Yes, but I don't think that we're actually unleashing the military to push the free trade agreement through. In fact, it's been argued by some people in Colombia, and I'm sure my minute's long since up, but still, some people in Colombia have said that, in fact, a free trade agreement could contribute to more drug production in Colombia, because our subsidized crops will be pouring into Colombia, and those crops, mainly cereals, grains, rice, are grown by smallholders and medium-sized landholders in Colombia. These are the crops that you plant them and you can harvest them in less than a year, which only poor people need crops like that. Whereas the crops that will do well in a free trade agreement are the crops that you can plant and then wait several years to make the money. Cacao, timber, rubber, African palm. For those crops, you need lots of land, because you can't just harvest an acre of timber and make money off of it after 10 years. And you also need a lot of liquidity. You got to be able to live off something while you wait for those trees to turn into timber or those palm trees to give palm oil, whatever. Who in Colombia has most of the big land and has plenty of cash on hand to live off of? It's the narcos. So we may be helping the narcos because they've bought up huge tracts of land to do these sort of projects, and also helping them by pushing many of the smaller landholders into the coca economy. Lice.
On the question of whether the drug war is a smokescreen, yes. I was in Washington during the time period between the Cold War and the drug war. It lasted about a minute. And you could see this anxiety almost. We don't have a role. What are we going to do? I really do believe from my time there in kind of the bureaucratic politics, thing that you learn about in graduate school. Bureaucracies seek to perpetuate themselves, and you really, really strongly see that with the U.S. military commands. They need a role, and they find it in these simple terms, and they were lost for a little while after the Cold War. Then they found their way with the drug war, and now we're concerned about the war on terror becoming that yet another mantle for basically what they want to do, which is military engagement and being involved in counterinsurgency. And so when the time came to be able to transfer Colombia from just the drug war piece to the war on terror as well, it was a very simple decision there. After 9/11, it was one no one could stop. So I think that's important. I do think, though, one impression I think is important not to have out there, and that is just that it's only the United States pushing all of this on Latin America. And I'm going to take, again, the case of Colombia. Never seen a government lobby so hard to get an 80% military package. And that was before Uribe. It was with Pastrana. The Colombian embassy took the actor who plays Juan Valdez to the political balls of Washington and handed out 20,000 yellow roses and little packages of coffee, saying Colombia has other products besides coca, and courted the United States and enticed the United States into this. It was a dual operation. That was something that the Colombian government actively sought in a way that I've never seen. I've never seen something so effective. So it's important as we talk about all these problems of the U.S. policy towards the region to not think it's that Latin American governments might not play in their own ways to the kinds of assistance that they do get, at least in that case.
Excuse me.
Thank you very much.
I am not sure if my question was addressed about what do you think is the connection or relation between the aid of Plan Colombia and the U.S. economic policies that the United States have been promoting. And another reason why I asked that question is because there is a specific language about privatization and other related stuff in Plan Colombia.
Well, I tried to. I said that I don't see the direct connection, the direct plot to put down those who would be opposing it, but there is, of course, a convenience there. But I don't think that people in State Department and Southern Command are going, yes, we're putting down those union leaders and making sure that big business can do what it wants.
I think the panelists will be here, so you're free to approach them after that. Please join me in giving a hand for the panelists.